Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm joined by my husband, Sush. And we are going to be talking about the Hugo Novellas. The Hugos are an award for SFF, and we like to vote in those each year. So this is just sort of our thoughts on the shortlist for the Hugo Novellas this year. We're going to be going in order of my ranking, but sometimes Sush has different feelings about things, and so he'll tell you when his ranking is a little bit different from mine. And we'll just go through and kind of share our thoughts on the shortlist. So first, before we move into the books that I'm ranking, I do have a couple of unranked books, and I believe that these are both unranked for Sush as well. Yep. We chose not to pick up these books. So the first is Mended by Alix Harrow. We have both read some things by Alix Harrow before and just not really gotten along with it. So this is actually kind of an author DNF for us. We don't pick up anything by Harrow anymore. The other book is Where the Drowned Girls Go by Seanan and McGuire. This is, I believe, book 6 or 7, something like that, in the Wayward Children series, and we actually had loved the first few novellas in the series, but over time we're finding that we're not really clicking with these novellas anymore, and we have both DNF'd the series, so both of these books are going unranked for us.
At number 4 is Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a book which is loosely a hero's rise story through revolution. And the world that it is set in is a world where there is basically two almost biological species of ogres and humanity, and where the ogres are the privileged wealthy class and the class in power, whereas humans are more like peasantry. It's set in a loosely feudal kind of a system. And basically, and the story kind of follows this guy who's the son of a village chieftain, so to speak, and is therefore kind of like in a position of relative privilege among the humans. And essentially it's a story of it's a story of a hero's rise, but there's also just so much of, okay, we're being told that this is a mediocre person who keeps messing up things as they go along, but things keep falling into his lap, and he is not fully conscious of the fact that they're falling into his lap. And he sees his struggles maybe and doesn't see all the things that are going in his favor. And essentially that makes for a really poor reading experience in a sense, because you're getting a little frustrated with the guy. And so now there's a question where you step out of the book where it's like, okay, wait, is this a hero's journey story? Because I can't get behind that. Then is this a story of a hero's redemption? I mean, is that the purpose of the story? Because that's been done a ton of times and it's still not very enjoyable to read through that. Now, I kind of made a prediction about where I thought this book was going to go about 30% of the book in, and that prediction is why I saw the book through to the end. Okay. And in the end, I think this book is still doing something subversive in the genre. And I think it's doing something really interesting with narrative and setting up expectations and basically, flipping them on its head. I'm not going to go any further because of spoilers, but the idea is very much that I think this book is doing something interesting with storytelling. I did not like the reading experience. A lot of times I felt that the guy was insufferable, but I think the story is doing something interesting in the genre.
Yeah, and I think for me, if you know my reading style, I am all about the journey, and I don't usually get very much payoff from endings. And so for me, the journey of being with this guy was just so unpleasant, and I was not engaged, and I didn't care what happened. And I actually, I read the first half of this, and then I kind of paused because Sush had started reading it, and I asked him, tell me if you think it's worth finishing, because right now I'm not that interested. And he's like, well, it does something interesting at the end. And so I got to it, but by something interesting in the end, it was like literally the last page, and that was not enough for me. I do think that I understand what Tchaikovsky is doing in this story, but it wasn't a fun reading experience for me. And so that understanding of what it's doing means that I am ranking it, but it's just probably kind of the bottom of my list of what I want to rank. But I can completely see why for a lot of readers this would be a really interesting and really engaging reading. And I think if you're this sort of person who gets a lot out of endings, this could be a really good payoff for you, but that's just not the kind of reader that I am. Then at number 3, I've got Into the Riverlands by Nghi, which is the third book in the Singing Hills cycle. I have really loved the previous books in this series so much, The Empress of Salt and Fortune and When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. And this book was also just really lovely. We follow the cleric Nghi as they are going on a journey, and they kind of get into a group of travelers, and a lot of this is the travelers telling stories. And so this whole series has been very meta in the way that it talks about storytelling. And I think that the way that it looks at how we tell stories about heroes and how there can be so many different stories and how those could show different facets of a person, but also not really truly encapsulate the person that those stories are about. I think that all of that is just really wonderful in this, but I don't know that this had quite the depth or the emotional impact as the previous 2 books in this series. It did have, though, a lot of cool fight scenes, and just like, it was neat. If you like those sort of almost, wuxia martial arts types of books, I think that this is a really fun book to pick up, and it has those interesting, deeper themes.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the reading of the book. It's been quite a while now that I have forgotten a lot of the details and specifics, but it was very immersive, and at the time of reading, it was very enjoyable. It doesn't rank very high for me because I think this leaned a lot more into the action for similar reasons. And I felt like maybe it was a homage to a lot of the kung fu movies, that kind of things, and that's basically it. So enjoyable, but not higher ranked for me. Next up, we have What Moves the Dead by Kingfisher. This book is supposed to be a retelling of The Fall of House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. The original text is one of my favorite stories, and as such, I had a mixture of high hopes as well as trepidation going into this because of that. And whenever a story tries to be a retelling of another story, I kind of try to evaluate it from 2 perspectives. One is, does it work by itself? Which usually I weight a little higher. And the second is, what is it doing in conversation with the other piece? There's a lot of sci-fi classics where I don't feel like the conversation is necessarily worth it, and it is better to reinvent. But in Poe's case, definitely it's something where I do like the classic and I like the conversation aspect. This story, I think, is a story that works really well by itself. And I think it's also doing something interesting in terms of in conversation with. I think it creates a different world, a different space than the original. And it has some amount of world building going on behind the scenes to kind of inform the various characters. There are a couple of new characters that are added, and I feel like they had, there was narrative choice and it had impact to the storytelling in how it was carried out, that I thought, okay, this was done well. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And I think there is this notion of modern social issues are kind of woven into this historical aspect with the world building in a very believable way. So I really enjoyed a lot of that. And the story itself, the atmosphere creation, a lot of that is something that I regard Poe really highly on. And I think Kingfisher does a really good job on those ends. I think the atmosphere is excellent. And then comes the place where it doesn't hold up to some of the aspects of the original, and that is some aspects of the end. Okay, I think with Poe's ending, the reader is left in an unresolved state where the reader is kind of expected to carry on the guilt and the uneasiness that the primary character of the story feels, and it's supposed to leave you unsettled. Kingfisher goes ahead and, well, settles that. And so it's kind of like this little bit of frustration. I completely understand the narrative choice, and yet I don't know that it works in conversation. It does work by itself, though, and as a full story, I think it works pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I feel basically exactly the same as Sush. And I think that, I love Edgar Allan Poe, hence the channel name. And I actually really like things being unsettled and things being sort of just creepy and living in that creepiness without necessarily resolving things. Like, I really like that. And so for the majority of this story, it has that creepiness, and the atmosphere is great, and I love the characters, and I love the way that the story unfolds. But then the ending kind of resolves everything, and I'm like, oh, okay. And it just kind of didn't have the impact that I wanted it to, where by resolving things in the ending, which was Kingfisher's goal, I think that I was left a little unsatisfied. But I did really enjoy this. I thought it was very atmospheric, and I really liked some of the choices that she made, like Sush was talking about, to include different social issues, but also just the world building was very cool. The creepiness and kind of what was going on was really cool. And yeah, so I quite liked this, but maybe not quite as much as the original. And then at number 1 for me is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. So this is a novella set in, I believe, the 1920s, 1930s in Chicago. And it's got this kind of gangster detective noir feel, which often I don't like, but I loved it here. The atmosphere in this was fantastic. We have this feeling of kind of the gangsters and the speakeasies, and we have our main character who is a detective, and she gets drawn into one last case. Just such a typical noir detective type of deal, where she basically investigates supernatural things. In this world there are angels and demons, and she actually only has a couple days left to live, because 10 years before she had made a deal with a demon, and because of that her soul will be sacrificed in a few days, and so this is her last case that she's taking on, and she's taking this on partially because it pays a lot and she wants to leave money for her girlfriend, her lover, so that her, she'll be set up in the future. Their relationship is just like the sweetest, gentlest sapphic romance. They're very supportive of each other, and I love the way that this story unfolds as we see what this case is and what the detective is getting drawn into. It does get a little bit action and violence heavy towards the end, which isn't so much my taste, but I just really enjoyed the reading experience of this. I was so drawn to the characters and the world building and the atmosphere, so I had such a fun time that I just really loved this.
I think I had a very different reading experience, unfortunately. I think part of my issues were that I did not get with the main character. And the noir thing is not a positive for me either, and in my case it did not land. But the main character for me, I felt, had a certain amount of martyrdom angst going into things, and that colored everything for me, so that I was just rolling my eyes half the time. And then the two relationships that are core to the story, I think, one is with her brother and one is with her partner. I could not stand the brother, and I thought that the main character was keeping very important secrets from her partner, and I therefore was not rooting for their relationship. I was all on train of the partner needs to dump her. So it's kind of like going from there to enjoying the story was always going to be a difficult task. So this did not work for me.
Okay, so those are our thoughts and rankings for the Hugo novellas this year. If you guys have read any of these, if you have different thoughts, if you have different rankings, I mean, obviously Sush and I have some differences in our own rankings, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.